what happens if a resident stops cooperating? There's a lot of talk at the moment that landlords are losing control under the Renters' Rights Act, and if you're a self-managing landlord, you may already be feeling less certain, there's more rules, there's more pressure. So let me ask you a very practical question. What would you do if your resident simply stopped cooperating, not responding, not allowing access? Communication just stops, because this is where many owners feel really exposed. So let's start by calming it down. It's not new. Residents have always occasionally stopped cooperating. What's changing from the 1st of May is how situations are handled and how informed residents are now. What has changed? They're more informed, they're more aware of the process, they're more confident in how the system works, and importantly, the government is actively updating guidance available for residents. So they are starting with tenancies with a clearer understanding of their position. So the reality is everything still happens. Even with good residents, situations change. There's financial pressures, life events, misunderstandings, and sometimes communication breaks down. A recent case study that we had when things really turned, let me give you a real example. We were asked to help a landlord who described their resident as very difficult. Communication had completely broken down. But when we looked at the situation, the issue wasn't the resident. It was the lack of structure on what had been agreed. Well, not agreed. The landlord had redecorated the property, and there had been a conversation that the rent would increase as a result, which on the surface sounded reasonable. Everybody was in agreement. However, there was nothing in writing. There was no agreement on the rent increase. There was no clear definition of what redecoration included. So when the resident received a rent increase of £120 a month, they refused to pay. From their perspective, they hadn't agreed to it. The work certainly wasn't what they had expected. From the landlord's perspective, they'd invested in the property, they had redecorated, and the increase felt justified. And at this key moment, the landlord took it as a personal affront. What had been a friendly, informal relationship turned really unpleasant. Communication went very quickly. So what happened next? Well, we stepped in. We acted as mediators. We worked with both sides. The resident accepted that improvements had been made, and the landlord accepted that the £120 was above the market rate. So we found the middle ground. But here's the key point. This could have very easily gone to the first tier tribunal, and if it had, the landlord would have likely lost. Not because they were unreasonable, but because there was no written agreement, no documented evidence, no clear process. So the lesson, this is the world we've lived in for years. It's been informal, it's been friendly, it's based on trust. But this is not the world we're moving into. The new reality in today's environment is that everything needs to be in writing. Everything needs to be clearly agreed and properly documented with proof. Because I thought that's what we agreed is no longer good enough. So why this matters more than ever? Well, your residents are becoming better informed. They understand the process, they understand their rights, and they are more likely to challenge. Alongside that, councils are more active. Enforcement is increasing. Formal routes are more accessible, and this is where things can escalate. If situations like this are not handled correctly, they can move towards formal disputes, tribunal involvement, council escalation. And again, success will always depend on evidence, process, and documentation. So the financial reality of all this, if things escalate and compliance isn't strong, rent increases can be overturned. Possession can be delayed if that's the route you go down. Disputes become formal. And in some cases, rent repayment orders of up to 24 months' rent can be issued, and locally that's close to £30,000. The key mistake wasn't the rent increases, it wasn't the redecoration, it was just the lack of clarity. and reacting personally instead of professionally. That was the problem with the landlord. So what's the professional approach? Going forward, everything needs to be clearly agreed, clearly recorded, clearly evidenced. And when things go wrong, please stay calm, stay structured, stay professional. So let's all balance this out. Most residents are very reasonable, as are good landlords. And when expectations are clear, documented, agreed up front, problems are avoided. So what's the self-managing challenge? Well, if you manage the property yourself, you're responsible for setting expectations, recording agreements, managing communications, staying professional under pressure. And that's actually where many owners get caught out. So before anything changes, ask, particularly on the rent side, is this clearly agreed? Have you got a section 13 and recorded? And if something goes wrong, am I responding professionally or am I getting a bit personal about it? There's a huge amount of talk about landlords losing control of their property with the new laws coming in, but in reality, control isn't lost, it's just changed. It now comes from structure, from clarity, from process, because in today's market, if it's not written down and you can't prove it, it didn't happen. Why don't you subscribe to Maxine Lester TV, where we'll guide you through some real situations like this so you can stay compliant and protect your investment. We look forward to seeing you there.